Well, alrighty, here we go. So, welcome to today's lesson, guys. Today we're going to be focusing on comparing the different past tenses. Specifically, I want to teach you the past simple tense versus the past perfect tense, and I also want to talk about the past perfect continuous tense compared to the past perfect tense. So before we start, I might just give the page a quick share so that it gets the word out there a little bit more. So if you have time, quickly give the live stream a share and give me a love heart, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. I've got my mic on. Oh, it's a bit cold here today in Melbourne, but let's get this going. So give me a quick share if you can, guys, and give me a love heart or a thumbs up if you can hear me. Let's just get the channel some exposure. Hey, we're going live. Woohoo! So again, we're going to talk about past tenses today. We're going to talk about the past simple tense, the past perfect tense, and the past perfect continuous tense. I've still got a cold. I'm still getting over that, so forgive me if I cough or sneeze. Should be all good though. Before we get started, I want to quickly talk about some announcements. So I've rebranded the Aussie English Supporter Pack, which is now the Aussie English Classroom. So the Aussie English Classroom. This is where you guys get weekly lessons sent to your email, or you can access them when you sign up on the website. If you haven't signed up, go and check it out. The Aussie English Classroom. This is so you can study Australian English anywhere, anytime. It's $1 to try it for a month. $1. $1. So go onto the website and sign up to be a part of the Aussie English Classroom. Aside from that, I've been working with members of the Aussie English Classroom to transcribe the episodes that come out during the week. Chris had a really good idea. He was talking about how I can make a Google document for you guys to work together as a group, as a mob. We're going to call you guys the transcription mob, to transcribe these episodes, the shorter episodes that I release together to work your English and to practice. So if you're interested in that, come over to the Aussie English Virtual Classroom, the Facebook group, and chat to Chris and everyone there. He's going to be the head of the group of the mob that work with the transcriptions. Aside from that, guys, I'm also working on a phrasal verb course for you. I know how evil phrasal verbs are. I'm trying to come at it from a different kind of point of view where I talk more with regards to the different prepositions that are used and try and give you an idea of the concepts, you know, like going over, where I talk about that movement and then changing the verbs in and out. So I'm putting a course together for all phrasal verbs to try and let you understand the concepts so that you can create phrasal verbs when you speak spontaneously without having to think, do I use over, do I use up, do I use, around, all of that stuff. So they're the announcements. Let's get into it, guys. Let's start talking about past tenses in English. I know these are kind of tricky. The first section here, I would love to talk about the past simple tense. The past simple tense, like I went, he looked, she clapped. That's the past simple tense. And I want to compare this to the past perfect tense, which would be something like I had looked, he had clapped, she had gone. Okay, so I want to compare these two past tenses. I want to tell you different sentences, give you different sentences that are sort of comparing both of these, and then I want to tell you sort of how I imagine these things going on in my head, what I'm conceptualizing when I use these tenses, and why I use them. So the past simple tense, I went, she clapped, he looked. The past simple tense is used for an action that has been completed, that has finished, it's done in the past. And it's usually a point in time. It wasn't ongoing. It's usually just a point in time. We went over that more thoroughly last week. So if you want to look into the past simple in more sort of more depth, go back and have a look at that episode. Whereas the past perfect tense, I had looked, she had clapped, he had walked, he had gone. We add the had in there in the past perfect tense and then the past participle. And we use this for an action that had been completed. It had been completed in the past before another action. So this action took place first in the past. It had taken place before another action took place. So here's the little, I guess the little symbol today, the little graph. This is the present tense. And when I use the simple past, I'm talking about an event that's taken place in the past. I saw him yesterday. Whereas when I use the past perfect tense, it's putting two events in context with one another and telling me that this event with the past perfect had seen, had gone, had clapped, had watched, took place before this event, in the past simple tense, or that it was taking place, if I use the past perfect continuous tense, when this happened. So this one interrupted it. So we're going to talk about some sentences now where I can put these two tenses in the same sentence and give you a bit of context as to why we use the past simple and why we use the past perfect. So hopefully this helps, guys, because I know that these tenses are a pain in the butt. Okay, sentence number 1. She had texted him. She texted him before he arrived. She had texted him before he arrived. And I was just thinking, where's my phone? I want to show you guys. And then I realized I'm actually filming on my phone. So she had texted him. She had texted him in the past perfect because she had texted him before he arrived. So before this event that happened in the past, she had done something else. Another event had taken place. So before he arrived, she had texted him. She had texted him before he arrived. If I didn't use the past perfect tense there, I wouldn't know which way around these events happened. If I just said she texted him and he arrived, I wouldn't know, did she text him before? Did she text him after? And so that's why we say she had texted him before she arrived. Okay, so that's the first sentence. The second one, he had been in France before I had arrived, or before I had. She had been in France, or he had been in France before I had, before I arrived, before I went, before I decided to go. So the basic idea there is that before I decided to go, before I went, before I'd gone to France, he had been there. So he was already there. He was already there in the past before I had decided, before I decided to go, before I went to France, before I got off the plane. So this thing had already happened before this thing happened. So that's sentence number 2. That was actually a bad example. Sentence number 3. I had already eaten dinner when he called. I had already eaten dinner. I had already eaten dinner when he called. So the basic idea here is obviously he called me on the phone, and when he called, when I answered this phone and talked to him in the past, I had already eaten dinner. So in the past was when I ate dinner. Back in the past, I had eaten dinner before he called, or when he called. So when he called, that was one part in the past. That was one position in the past, but it was closer to the present. When he called, I had already eaten dinner. I had already eaten dinner. So that was sentence 3. Sentence 4. My girlfriend had made me breakfast before I woke up. My girlfriend had made me breakfast before I woke up. Another thing to mention here is that you can switch these sentences around, guys. So I could say, before I woke up, my girlfriend had made me breakfast. Or I can say, my girlfriend had made me breakfast before I woke up. And the reason that we can switch these things around again is because we're using these tenses, and the tenses tell me she had made me breakfast. She had made me breakfast in the past perfect tense. This had already happened before I woke up. Get it? So that's the use of these things, and that's how we can switch these sentences around because of context, because of the tenses that are being used. She had made me breakfast before I woke up. When I woke up, when I got out of bed, I looked around and I could smell breakfast. I walk outside and she had already made me breakfast. She'd completed that task before I got out of bed. Another action that also took place in the past. So these two things took place in the past, and these tenses give us context as to which one happened before the other. If I just said, she made me breakfast, I woke up, I don't know if she made me breakfast after I woke up, when I woke up, before I woke up, and so that's why we're using these tenses. All right, number 5. We'd already finished the game before you showed up. We had already finished the game, and we can contract had. We'd already finished the game before you showed up. Before you showed up. And in this case, showed up. To show up, it's a phrasal verb, and it means to arrive, to appear. If I show up at someone's house, I arrive at someone's house. I knock on the door, oh, I've just shown up. So if we had already finished the game, we already did it, this thing had already been completed, it had been completed in the past, over here, before you arrived, before you showed up, before you came over and knocked on the door. So this thing had been completed before this thing. We'd already finished the game. We had already finished the game. We'd already finished the game before you arrived. We'd already finished the game before you'd arrived. All right, we're getting through these. Now let's play around with it. We'll turn one of them into a question. And remember, if we use the simple past tense, we have to add in did if we turn that into a question. So we would say, did he come instead of he came? But if we turn the past perfect into a question, we just invert it. So I had been, had I been? You had been, had you been? Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So the next one is, did he come over to your house after you texted him? Did he come over to your house? Did he come over to your house after you texted him? After you texted him. So you texted him. This has taken place in the simple past. You texted him. And then I'm saying, had he... Oh, sorry. No. I got that around the wrong way. Did he come over? That's what's taken place in the more recent past, in the past simple. Did he come over? Did he show up? Did he arrive at your house? Did he come over? After, so this thing is after this thing, which is when you texted him. So had you texted him before he came over, or did he come over after you had texted him? And see how we're using after and before to also give context to these two situations. So this happened before this happened after this. Does that make sense? We're getting through them all right. We're getting through them. So sentence number 7. He could already speak before his sister had learnt to walk. He could already speak. And so this is in the past simple again, but we're using a modal verb or an auxiliary verb, could, to be able to. He could, so putting that in the past, he could already speak. He could already speak before she had learned to walk. So that's saying that, I think I've actually confused myself with this one. He could. See, even this is hard for even natives, guys. This is hard. He could already speak before she had learnt to walk. Yeah, that's a confusing example. I think I'm going to skip that one because that's playing around in my head, but it seems like it makes sense. Anyway, we'll skip that one. The next sentence. Had you thought of going to Australia before he suggested it? Had you thought? So this is the one that's over here in the past perfect. Had you thought of going to Australia, about going to Australia? Had you thought of it? Had it been in your head? Had it been something you were thinking about? Had you thought of going to Australia before he suggested it? So he suggested it. He said to you, hey, you should go to Australia. But before he told you, or before he suggested to you, that you should go to Australia, in the past simple there, you had already thought of it. Or had you already thought of it? So was it something that you had already thought, an action that had already taken place before another action occurred? There you go. Had you thought of going to Australia before he suggested it? Sentence number 9. The students had studied thoroughly before they went into their exam. The students had studied thoroughly before they went into their exam. So again, they had studied before they went into the exam, meaning they had studied in the past perfect before they went into the exam. So it puts into context that prior to going to the exam, prior to entering the exam, prior to doing the exam, they had studied thoroughly. They had studied a lot. They had worked hard. They had done a lot. They had prepared well before they went into the exam. One more example sentence for you guys before we get into comparing the past perfect continuous with the past perfect. When I tore my jumper, I was annoyed, 2 actions this time, because I had just bought it. When I tore my jumper, so imagine, I don't have one close to me. Imagine I have a jumper here, I tear it on something. So when I tore it, maybe on a tree or a stick or something, I'm walking in the street and my jumper tears, pulls apart. When I tore my jumper in the past simple there, I was annoyed. I tore my jumper and I was annoyed. This happened at the same time because I had already, or I had just bought the jumper. So before tearing it, before being annoyed, I had bought the jumper. I had just bought the jumper. So I had gone to the shops. I had bought the jumper. I had then walked home. And on the way home, I tore the jumper. On the way home, I was annoyed. I was frustrated. I was irritated. I had destroyed the jumper on the way home. So that puts into context, I had bought the jumper before I tore the jumper, before I was annoyed. So there you go. I hope that makes sense, guys. Go back and listen again. Again, this will be on the podcast, so you can listen at your leisure as much as you need. I know I'm being pretty repetitive, but I want to get it in your head. I want to make you think of these sentences and start using the past simple and the past perfect tense, because they are sort of, the past perfect's more advanced and it will allow you to sort of express your ideas more simply in sort of more condensed sentences, and you'll sound a lot more like a native when you conquer, when you get on top of this tense. So that was a comparison of the past simple tense and the past perfect tense. Now I'm going to read through 5 sentences and I'm going to turn them into the past perfect continuous tense from the past perfect tense. So this time, what do we got here? I'll hold it up. This time, if we turn the past perfect tense here, if we turn the past perfect tense into the past continuous tense, I'm going to see if I can draw. I'm probably going to really fail at this. But if we make it continuous, that tends to mean that this is ongoing until this point, and then ... So it might keep going, it might stop, it might be interrupted. But the basic idea is, as opposed to the past perfect, maybe I'm right, past perfect and then continuous underneath, just so we don't get confused. So now that's the past perfect continuous, and I'm going to make this more obvious. So this is, we'll draw an arrow there as well. When the past perfect becomes the past perfect continuous, for example, I had seen him, becomes, that was the past perfect. I had seen him before I did something else. If we turn it into, let's get the reflection off it. If we turn the past perfect into the past perfect continuous, I had been seeing him. So this was an ongoing thing. I had been seeing him for a period of time, not just a point, but a period when you showed up. So I had been doing this thing had been ongoing over a period of time in the past when this thing interrupted it, when this thing stopped it, when this thing occurred and I kept going. The basic idea is that instead of this thing happening first and then this happening, when we were talking about the past perfect and the past simple, if we're going to talk about the past perfect continuous, it's over a length of time. So this thing had been happening when another thing cut it off, interrupted it, or occurred over the top of it, or at the same time during this thing. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to read through 5 sentences and give you some context. I love context, obviously. Okay, some of these are from the previous exercise, guys. So she had texted him before he showed up. She had texted him before he showed up. Which tense is that in? She had texted before he showed up. Can you guess which one that is in, or which 2 tenses those are? She had texted him before he showed up. So instead of the continuous, this is the first one, we're doing the past perfect. So she had texted, this thing took place first, before he showed up, right? Right? And if we turn this into a past, this means, I guess to explain first, if she had texted him, that's the idea that it occurred at a point in time. So she sent one text and then later on he showed up. She sent one text and then he showed up. That's the basic idea with the past perfect. She had texted him once before he showed up. If we change this into the continuous, if we say she had been texting him, that is no longer the idea that she texted him once. That's the idea that for a period of time before he showed up, she had been texting him. She was texting him. So that's the idea here that from this period until he showed up, she'd been texting him periodically, again and again. Could be twice, could be 1,000,000 times, but the basic idea is this is happening over a period of time as opposed to just once, right? Just once. She had texted him before he arrived. That's one time before he arrived. That's just these 2 events. This happened and then this happened. Whereas if I say she had been texting him before he arrived, that's the idea that for a period of time she was texting him and then he arrived. And then he arrived. Okay, so that's example number 1. Example number 2. I had waited for 3 hours before the bus arrived. And notice again, I'm using before to give you context, right? Before is added context to tell you which order these things happened in. It can disappear from time to time, but I had waited for 3 hours before the bus arrived. Before the bus arrived. So again, that's past perfect. I had waited. So this point in time is what I had done. I had waited before, and then the bus arrived. So the bus arrived closer to present, and before that period I had waited for 3 hours. I had waited for 3 hours. So now if we talk about the past perfect continuous, I had been waiting for 3 hours. We just turned it into a period of time. I had been waiting for 3 hours when the bus arrived, when the bus showed up, when the bus appeared, when the bus came. So that's the idea now that for 3 hours, this period of time, I had been waiting, and then all of a sudden that was intersected, that was cut by the bus showing up. So for 3 hours, I had been waiting so I had been waiting when, it's something I was doing when the bus showed up. So notice that we're not using before now, we're using when to say that this is what had been happening to this point when the bus arrived. There's example number 2. Example number 3, I had eaten dinner before he called. So remember, this is using the past simple and the past perfect. I had eaten dinner before he had called, which is closer to the present. So when he called and I answered and I was like, hey, thanks for calling, he might have said, did you already have dinner? And I could say, yeah, I had dinner before you called, right? We talked about that previously. But if I want to turn this into the past perfect continuous, what do? How do I change the sentence? I had eaten my dinner. I had eaten dinner before he called. If I want to turn this into the continuous version of the past perfect tense, guys, what do? How do I change this sentence? Can you type it out? So I had eaten dinner. I had eaten dinner. That's the past perfect. And I had done this, rather, before he called. I had eaten dinner before he called. So if we convert this, exactly. Noman just nailed it. I had been eating dinner when he called. So now we say when he called to show that when he called, he's interrupted something. He's interrupted what I had been doing. Yeah, you guys are nailing it. So again, this thing happened right away in the past here. I had been doing it, and then he called. Something else that happened in the past. And then he interrupted my dinner. And then he showed up. And then he did something. So again, had been doing, that's the past perfect continuous all the way along in the past, until another event in the past interrupted it. I had been eating dinner when he called. Make sense? All right, 2 more to go and then we'll get into question time. My girlfriend had made me breakfast when I woke up. Actually, I'll rephrase that. My girlfriend had made me breakfast before I woke up. Okay, so again, I'm using context here. This time it's not the continuous. My girlfriend had made me breakfast. It's something that had occurred. It had happened before another thing happened. So this thing had happened before this thing happened. My girlfriend had made me breakfast before I woke up. So how do we change this into the continuous past perfect now, guys? My girlfriend had been, she had been, and then I woke up. Or she had been something, me breakfast, when I woke up. So what do you think it is? How would you convert this into the past perfect continuous tense, guys? If the past perfect is my girlfriend had made me breakfast before I woke up, how do we convert it into my girlfriend had been making, well, I just gave it away. My girlfriend had been making me breakfast. She had been, make sure it's got to be had been making me breakfast when I woke up. So now it's my girlfriend started making breakfast here in the past, or had started making me breakfast. This thing had been happening. It had been happening all the way up to the point here in the past simple when I woke up. When I got up. When I woke up and got out of bed. So she had been making me breakfast and then I got out of bed, or when I woke up or when I got out of bed, she had been doing something all the way to this point in time when it was then interrupted, and we use the past simple. I woke up, when I got up, when I gave her a hug, when I said good morning. Make sense? One more sentence and then we'll get into question time, guys. Remember to chuck your questions down in the comments box here and I will answer them as much as I can, as quickly as I can. So the last one is, he had traveled to France, or he had traveled in France, depending on how we want to talk about it. He had traveled in France before I moved to Europe. So this is something he had done before I did something. You guys will be masters at this by now, masters at it. So now we're using the past perfect again. It's not the continuous yet. It's something that he had done. It had been completed. It had been completed before I did something. He had traveled in France before I moved to Europe. he had made a life in Europe before I came to Europe, right? So now if we turn that into the past perfect continuous, how do we change that, guys? How do we change it? He had traveled in France before I moved to Europe. He had been something in France when I moved to Europe. And Ruchi's got it here. He had been traveling. Samira's got it as well. He had been traveling in France when this thing was interrupted by me moving to France. It was interrupted when I moved to France. So he had been traveling in France. It was ongoing. He was still traveling. He had been still traveling when I arrived, when I moved to France. He had been doing this thing all the way up until now. Okay? Or all the way up until this point in the past, I want to say. He had been traveling in France when I moved to Europe, when his traveling in France was interrupted by me moving to Europe. So that's it, guys. That's it. That was a comparison of the past simple tense and then the past perfect tense that we began with, and then we went over the past perfect continuous, that idea of something happening, it's stretching out, the ing, doing, it's happening over a longer period, but this thing happening in the past, and then being chopped, sort of interrupted, divided, by someone doing something else, by another action, which was the past perfect. So I hope that helps, guys. I know these tenses are really annoying. I know they're frustrating. I will try and do more in the future. I'm going to slowly go through in these classes, in these live classes, and talk about tenses more. And then obviously open it up into question time, where you guys can ask me anything and everything that you want, and we can just chat. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. Before you guys obviously start getting questions here, as I can't see any yet, I will start answering some other ones from the last week. So Luciana says, or asks, when I talk, I don't like my pronunciation, I don't like my accent, I want to speak like a native, I have good vocabulary and I have good writing, but how do I do this? Luciana, as I've said a few times in some of these sorts of questions, it's a good point and it is important. The key here is paying attention, listening as much as possible, listening like crazy, and repeating. It's one of those things where you have to do it again and again and again. It's not the kind of thing, pronunciation and accent reduction, it's not the kind of thing that you can learn once and then just have perfect for the rest of your English speaking life. You have to keep doing it all the time. One key thing is to get corrected. So you could hire me as a coach. You could find someone else who's a native speaker that has time to listen to you speak and point out problems for you to correct. But the basic idea is that if you get to that point where you can speak incredibly well, you can write incredibly well, you've got good vocabulary and everything else, but you still want to work on your pronunciation, you still want to improve your accent, then at that point, it's almost certainly going to be required that you find someone to sit down, to listen and really scrutinize, really pull apart, examine, imagine a magnifying glass, your pronunciation, your accent, and say, it's really good, you're 99% of the way there, but this part needs work, this part needs attention, you should probably learn to say this and not this, but yeah. So the takeaway, listen, repeat exercises like crazy, even if you know the stuff off by heart, keep working the listening and repeating, always be listening and trying to copy, and then ask someone else who's a native speaker to examine your accent, whether you hire them as a coach or an English teacher, or they're a friend of yours that has time to sit down with you and give you some honest, scrutinizing feedback. That's what you need to do. You really need someone to start sort of pushing you closer to a high level of pronunciation and accent. But by that point, I would imagine that it's not the most important thing in the world. You're probably being understood perfectly well. So I hope that helps. So remember guys, chuck your questions down the bottom here if you have any, and I'll answer them when I can. Chuck your questions down. Ruchi, she asks, being stuck when not understanding the meaning of a word or of words. What do I do when I get stuck? And I actually wanted to ask her, I believe she commented back, I wanted to ask her the context of that question because I wasn't 100% sure what she meant. So she was saying, okay, she's replied here. So when she's reading, what does she do when she gets stuck? Gets stuck not understanding the meaning of words. So I've talked about this a few times with my method, guys. I would emphasize the fact that you need to read things multiple times. You need to read something one time first to take note of all the things that you don't know or that you're not 100% certain of the meaning. So you might get a highlighter and highlight these parts of the books. You might write the definitions of the words you don't understand, the phrases you don't understand, the expressions you don't understand when reading. But don't let it stop you from finishing all that you want to complete in that first session. So the first session, when I'm trying to overcome that part of the new vocab, I guess, when I'm reading, is to not get stuck on it, but to take note of it. So write them down, keep track of them, and then later is when I go and look up all the definitions. I make sure that I have a good understanding in my head of how they're being used in the context in which they're being used, in the book there, in the sentence. What do they mean? Make sure that I understand it, and then I read the whole thing again. I read it again. So that's what I do. And if you repeat this process again and again and again, pretty quickly, it's a curve that kind of looks like this. Pretty quickly, you run out of words to look up. It asymptotes off. It plateaus off like that. So the more you do this, I kind of treat books like a filter, right? Or like a net. I'm sort of like fishing for all the words that I don't know. I'm fishing for them. I look them up, I learn them, I read them again. I might speak them, use them, and then I move on. But you have to make sure you understand the vocab that you don't know or that you don't understand, right? You're not going to learn if you keep skipping over it. And that's the trouble with getting to a high level in English or any other language. When you get to that really high level, a lot of the time you can sort of infer what's going on based on the context, and you can let a lot of the language skip over your head or go over your head. The same with movies. I can watch a lot of movies in French and less so in Portuguese, and if I don't have subtitles on, it all goes to the wicket keeper, meaning that I'm playing cricket. This is a good expression for you guys. If something goes to the wicket keeper, the person who's guarding the wickets in cricket, it means the ball goes straight past you and you miss it, meaning you didn't understand it. So a lot of the time, if I don't have subtitles, a lot of these words go straight to the wicket keeper. They go over my head and I never pick them up. If I want to improve, I have to go actively look them up and try and improve. All right, so a few of you have left me questions here, so I'm going to try and go through those. Let me see. You answered had for a did question. Did you have dinner? Yes. I had dinner before you called. Sorry, I did not hear properly. Okay. So in that case, the reason that I answered a did question with had is because I mentioned two things and I had to put them in context with one another, right? So again, I'm sorry about the mess on here. I'll see if I can just clean the board up a little bit first. That can happen sometimes, and that's because you've asked one simple question that said, did you have dinner? So you're only asking about a single event in the past, one single thing in the past. But if I say, yes, I had dinner before you came over, I have to use had in this case. I can't use did because I've just had to insert the past perfect tense, because I'm now telling you that, yeah, I had dinner. I did have dinner before something else. So that's when you might answer questions sometimes that have certain auxiliary verbs or certain modal verbs, and you might switch it around, and it's based on the context that you're putting the thing that was asked in. So, did you have dinner? I did have dinner. So I can answer it with did if it's just talking about, yes, I did. I did have dinner. Did you have dinner? I did have dinner. But if I want to say that I did have dinner before another thing, I have to put them in context with these tenses. Yes, I had dinner before you arrived. So there you go. That's the main reason for that one, mate. Another question. Is it correct to say, I've sent him an email? Halen asks, is it correct to say I've sent him an email? Absolutely. I've sent him an email. I've sent an email to him. It's perfectly fine. It just depends on where you want to put the object in this sentence, which is him. So you can say I've sent him an email, but if you want to say what you've sent first, I've sent an email, you have to say to someone. I've sent him an email. I've sent an email to him. I've sent her a letter. I've sent a letter to her. Okay, so just make sure that if you mention the thing you're sending first and you're mentioning who's receiving it afterwards, you have to say to that person. However, if you switch them around and you're saying that you're sending someone something, you omit the to. You get rid of the to. I sent him an email. And the reason that you would do this, you wouldn't say I've sent him to an email, is because if you do that, it now sounds like you're sending the person to an email, which sounds incredibly weird, okay? So I hope that makes sense. Okay. Active Guy asks, could you please explain the difference between I would help you and I would have helped you? I would help you. All right, so the first one, I'm a little rusty with those tenses. I need to look up the conditional ones. In fact, I think I'm gonna have to get rid of this whole thing. So the first one is setting up something that is still potentially gonna happen. So if you imagine that we've got time at the bottom. Let's see if this is around the right way. So you've got, sorry about my handwriting. This is the present, right? This line is the present here. If you said, I would help you, that's you're sitting here and you're talking about something that is conditional, that may happen in the future. I would help you. I would, but I can't. So it's something that, you know, the person needs help, whether it's right now or it's in the future at some point. But you don't think you can, but you probably can't, but you can't, whatever. That's when you would say, I would help. If you say, I would have helped, but I had to do something else, you've just shifted it in the past. So it's like saying now, I wanted to help, and I would have helped. That's putting it in the past. If it had not been for something else. So there again, that's another complex thing. Now we've said I would have helped, which is put it into the past there, sort of the same position as the simple past. If I hadn't been doing something else, right? So we've just gone over the past perfect tenses. I would have helped in the past if I hadn't already had to do something else. If something hadn't already been in the way of me helping you. So I hope that makes sense, mate. It just slightly shifts the tense. But if you hear I would have and then past participle, just think, okay, past, it's pushed it backwards. I would have done it, but it's over now. I can't do it because it's not possible. It's finished. It's in the past. I would help is that you either can right now, it's a possibility right now, or it will be in the near future. So I would help you guys longer with English tonight if I didn't have to finish by 8 o'clock. Whereas if what's an example? If we finished the class tonight and it was like 10 p.m, I might say to someone, oh, I would have loved to have helped you in class longer, but I had to get off. I had to finish class by a certain time, although I would have helped longer if I could. I would have. So that's in the past. Whereas right now I could say, I would love to help you guys learn English all night, but I can't. After this finishes, I could say, I would have loved to have helped you all night, but I can't because it's over. It's finished. All right. I hope that makes sense, mate. Good question. Good question. All right. Norman asks, which phrasal verb should be used here? Kim still has not got something to starting his essay, through, off, over, around to. So you would say Kim still has not got around to starting his essay. Although you could use probably all the others depending on the context though. So this is where it gets confusing, right? Based on the sentence itself, it would make sense to me to say Kim has still not got around to starting his essay, which means he hasn't found time to do it, right, today. To get around to something is to find the time to do something. So if I had to prepare this lesson today and I hadn't done it, I could have said, I hadn't got around to preparing this lesson before I started. So I just winged it. I made it up. I improvised because I hadn't got around to preparing it. However, if Kim still had not got off to start his essay, it sounds awkward, but to get off is still a phrasal verb, which would mean sort of to leave. So you might be saying in that sense, if Kim still hasn't got off to start his essay, that could mean maybe he's at someone's house and he hasn't left yet to go and start his essay. He still hasn't got off to go start his essay. You could also say Kim still hasn't got over to start his essay. In that case, it would be he hasn't got over to your house. So over being the idea of you're at one place and you're going over to another place. If I said Kim still hasn't gotten over to start his essay, that would be the idea that he hasn't gone to someone else's house to start his essay. And now if I said Kim still hasn't gotten through, so the idea of you having some sort of tunnel and getting through to start his essay, again, that could make sense, but it's based on the context. You'd have to have something set up. Maybe there's a tunnel that he has to pass through before he starts his essay, right? So he still hasn't gotten through the tunnel in order to start his essay. So that's what I think. That's why I think phrasal verbs are really good. But the important thing for learning these guys, don't memorize phrasal verbs by heart. This is something that might be controversial, but I would say don't just try to memorize the 2,000 phrasal verbs by heart. So don't try and do it just by memory. Try and understand why we're using the prepositions that are being added on to the ends of certain verbs to create a phrasal verb. So go over, go through, go in, go out, go on, etc. Understand why we're adding these prepositions onto these verbs, and then you can just make them up as you speak. I walk over there, I go through here, I stand on this, like you'll be able to just learn 50 verbs, you'll be able to learn 10, 15 prepositions, and then make thousands of phrasal verbs from those, 50, 60 different words. You can then combine them, as opposed to learning 1,000 to learning 2,000 different phrasal verbs. So that's my tip. Try and understand the concepts. Why are we using this preposition? Why are we using this preposition? Why are we using this one? Okay, I understand. It's this action, and the verb explains how the action's occurring. So that's my tip there, guys. All right, some more questions. What does fair enough mean? Samira wants to know what fair enough means. That's a difficult one to answer. That's one of those things that is so commonly used, and yet it doesn't have, at least off the top of my head, I can use it and I can give you synonyms, but let's see if I can just quickly look up a definition for fair enough. Why do we use fair enough? Okay, again, yeah. So it's not just a single word that you can switch in and out with other ones. Fair enough is used sort of informally in order to admit that something is reasonable or acceptable. So I might be having a party and I want everyone to be there on time. I want everyone to show up. I want everyone to arrive on time. I might get a phone call and someone say, I've had a car accident. I'm okay, but I'm going to be half an hour late. I'm not going to get to your party on time. I'm really sorry. I might say, dude, fair enough. That is fair. That is fair enough. It's okay. I understand. It's acceptable. it's reasonable. That's totally fine. It's fair enough. I understand. You might also use it in an example where someone just tells you a fact that you didn't know. It's going to rain today. Oh, fair enough. Okay, that's acceptable. Sure. Maybe, well, you wouldn't use it in drastic things like I've got cancer. You probably wouldn't say, oh, fair enough. You know, that's the kind of thing that probably merits a bit more empathy and like, oh my God, that's horrible, you know? But fair enough is sort of for trivial things that are like, yeah, okay, fair enough, fair dinkum, sure, that's acceptable, that's reasonable. So fair enough. That's a good one. And it's one that you're going to hear Aussies use like crazy. Like crazy. So get on it. Use fair enough, guys. All right. Hugo wants to know, why do people say, when was your address? When they want you to tell them your address again instead of, when is your address? I think in that case, the reason they're saying, when is your address? When was your address? When was it again? That sounds really weird to me because an address is a physical place, not a time. So you would say where was your address instead of where is your address. So I have a feeling that's what you mean, mate, not when. When would be related to time. So if we change it now and just say where was your address instead of where is your address, the reason someone would ask this in the past tense and say was is because you've told them in the past, right? So it is still your address. You could say, where's your address again? What is it again? Although people are likely to say, where was your address when they want you to repeat something that you said. So they've just shifted it into the past because they're asking more about what you said. What was it that you said your address was? What was your address again? What was it? Or where was your address again? Where was it? Because you said it, because it's in the past, although it is still presently your address, okay? So that's probably why you would say, what was your address? Although you can still say, what is your address? It's totally fine. It's just how the person's thinking about it. What else have we got here? Is it rude to say, watch your back? If yes, what's the polite way to say it? For example, I'm behind someone doing something and I want to tell them not to step back. When should I say it? Okay, that's a good one, Vandad. That's a good one. So watch your back can be used as a threat to someone, meaning watch for being stabbed in the back. So if someone literally had a pen or a knife in jail and they were, threatening you, like, I'm going to kill you, mate. I'm coming for you. Then someone might tell you, or they might tell you, you better watch your back, meaning you better look behind yourself, you better be careful because I'm going to come and kill you when you least expect it. So in that case, it's a threat or a warning. It could come from the person saying, I'm going to kill you, watch your back. That's a threat. If someone else says to you, okay, dude, watch your back, that guy's angry and he's going to kill you. He's pissed, he's going to stab you. Watch your back, watch your back. So in that case, it's, be careful for being stabbed in the back. Stabbed in the back. In the case you're talking about, it's totally fine though, because you're saying watch your back as in be careful when you're coming backwards. Your back is facing me. I don't want you to back into me. I don't want to hit you in the back when I'm doing things, whether it's in a kitchen. So you might say watch your back. It's the same idea of like if I let someone into my house and they were really tall, I might say watch your head if I don't want them to hit their head on the top of the door frame. Or I might say watch your fingers if the door's about to shut and their hands are there. So just watch the thing. So in the first example there, watch your back is kind of a figurative thing. Also a literal one of like watch out because I'm coming for you and you're not going to see it. It's going to be behind you and I'm going to get you in the back. Whereas if you were to say to someone, watch your back when they're doing something and you're behind them and you don't want them to step back, you're saying be careful because your back is going to come towards me and potentially you're going to get injured. So it's definitely fine to say. It's one of those cases where it's how you say it. So just don't threaten someone and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. It's not rude. Okay. Active Guy asks, thank you, Pete. Some say I loved her the most and some say I loved her most. When do you skip the? And when they is the word most in the line. This is personal taste. So when would you say I loved her the most and I loved her most? Okay. Actually, I think if you were to say I loved her the most, that's the idea of out of everyone, out of everything, I was the one who loved her the most. So if you had 50 people who all loved her, I was the one who loved her most, right? I think you could use this as well with I loved her most, but depending on the context and what follows that sentence, yeah, I think they're interchangeable, but I have a feeling that I loved her the most would be the most common one. I loved her most is a little higher there, and yeah, that's difficult. I would just stick with the. You can drop it sometimes. I don't know the rule to that though. It sounds pretty sort of high level stuff that I would probably read in literature, but yeah, that's a bit of a confusing one. So I'll have to have a think about that in the future. But don't worry too much about that. I'm sure that's the kind of thing you've read somewhere and it's probably not what most people say, so don't panic. Is it rude to say watch your back? Wait, all right, you already asked that one. You asked that one as well. And Dad, you asked the same question several times, mate. You're killing it. All right, looks like we got through all the questions, guys. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask them below. I have a few more that I was going to go through before we finish up, guys, that I have here from other people. I had an Estonian guy ask, he says, I find it quite tricky to pronounce words with R. So he finds R words pretty difficult, and he wants me to pronounce the following words: rural, very, rarely, alright, and better. Better. Okay, so rural, I pronounce both R's in rural, and the A at the end there becomes like a schwa sound, rural. Very, I pronounce the R there, very, very. Rarely, I pronounce the first R, rare, but I ignore the second one. So that's actually part of the vowel in Australian English. Instead of saying rare, like an American, I would say rare. So I just let it come out, rare. Rarely. All right, I pronounce the R there, and in better, I don't pronounce the R at the end of better, unless better is followed by a vowel in another word. So better is, better is good. I would say better is good. Better is good. So go and do a search for one simple tip to sound Australian, words ending in ER, RE, AR, etc. on YouTube, and there's a whole video going through the pronunciation of all those words that end with a simple sound. Better, pleasure, treasure, behavior, etc. So I hope that helps, mate. Monica from Chile, she wants to know about homophones. So homophones are words that sound the same. It's really difficult for me to differentiate between words with these similar pronunciations, but different meanings. So these are homophones, guys. For example, allowed, as in to be allowed to do something. I allow it. ALLOWED. I will allow it. It was allowed. And the word aloud, as in out loud, as in I speak aloud. I'm allowed to speak aloud. I think you've mentioned some of these tricky words in Embarrassing English Errors. So these ones, Monica, the biggest thing is context. It's just context. You're not allowed to do that. You know instantly when I say that, you're not allowed to do that, that it is to be allowed, as in permission, right? Based on context. So that's how we get away with these things and why they've been allowed to sound the same. It's because in different contexts, they sound the same, but they mean completely different things, and we can work out the meaning based on the context. Another example was, I rose from the ground to sniff a rose in the bush, right? I rose from the ground to sniff a rose. I rose, the past participle here, or the simple past tense, I rose as in to rise. I rose, so I get up. I stand up, I rise, I rose. And a rose being the flower. I rose so I could smell a rose. Another example, as I'm sure you guys will know, is 2, 2, and 2. T-O, T-W-O, and T-O-O. 2, 2, and 2. I'm sure you guys know those. Also, where, and where. So like, where are you? We are, where. I'm wearing a t-shirt. And software or malware. So there's heaps of these. I guess to finish up though, but again, just context is what will give it away. To finish up, the coolest one that I found in English is that we have only one septet homophone. So septet meaning 7. We have one word in English, well, 7 words in English that have one sound. That's brutal. So this is raise, 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 and raise. So they all are spelt differently, but they all sound exactly the same. I don't have all the definitions there, but yeah, how crazy is that? So there's one sound there that has 7 different meanings. Anyway, I'll get through some more of these questions because I just saw them pop up. What have we got here? Can you please explain have had? I have had. Maria wants to know what have had means. So this is where you have put something in the present perfect tense. So as opposed to the past perfect tense, which would be had had. Have had is where you have put the verb to have in the present perfect. And so remember, in order to put a verb in the present perfect tense, you have to use have as an auxiliary verb. So if you want to put to have, as in I have something, in the present perfect tense, you have to also insert have as the auxiliary verb or the modal verb, and then you have to use the past participle of the verb to have, which is had. So I have had a good time. So that's why we have to use two hads there. If we use it in the past simple though, we would say I had had. That's why we say had twice. So now we're using had as the auxiliary verb. I believe that's what's happening. And then we're also using had as the past participle. So there's some of those rare cases where it looks confusing because we're using the same verb in different forms twice. Or we're even using the same word in different grammatical forms, but twice. I had had a great time before he arrived. Right? So I hope that makes sense. Alrighty then. Hi Pete. If someone or a country wants to let two countries fight together and the countries rule better, what do you say in English? That's a complicated question. So if someone or a country wants to let two countries fight together and the country rules better, what would you say? I guess, I don't know, mutualism, that they're working together, that they are better together than apart. I assume that's what you mean, mate. I'm not sure, but I hope that makes sense. So yeah, just working together, to work together. Active Guy asks, what are the meanings of the words whack and swag? I heard you say whack when you were being the Aussie Jesus. That wasn't me being the Aussie Jesus. I think in that case, to whack someone up meant to put someone up. So I think in the case of that video, which was a video on YouTube that I did, a breakdown of Australian Jesus. It was a skit, a joke, a comedy thing on YouTube. Go check it out. And he says he's going to whack me up on the cross, meaning he's going to put me up. So whack would be the idea of you have a wall like this and you've done that. You've whacked it. So they're going to whack me up on the wall. So it's just the idea of putting them up, but kind of sloppily or doing it like with a bang. They're going to whack me up on the wall. We might whack on a new paint layer on our wall. We might whack up a poster. I might whack up a few paintings on the wall. So whack, it means put, place. Yeah, put or place, but it's sort of a more colloquial slang term for that. Yeah, whack it up there, mate, wherever you want. Just whack it on the wall. Put it up there. Swag, I'm not sure how to exactly explain swag. And again, that depends what you mean. So like a swag is a piece of fabric that you can use as like a small tent for one person, a swag. If we use it like a noun like that. So you'll see a lot of Australian folklore where people went out and they would sleep in the bush in a swag. They would sleep in this kind of like leather or cloth kind of fabric thing that was like a very, very small tent, a swag. Might not even really be a tent, but it's sort of to protect them from the rain and from the wind. If you have swag, it's kind of like to be confident, to have a good attitude, to have a really confident attitude or manner. So if someone's got swag, I guess we're using it as like an adjective there. Yeah, he's got a lot of swag. Well, it's a noun. But if you're talking about someone having a lot of swag, that would be like, you know, he's just walking down the street really confidently, like, yeah, I'm bad. I've got swag. I've got swag. So that could be how it was meant. But aside from that, I'm not sure. They're the two ways that I would use the word swag, mate. Nomen. What about this one? I think might should be used, but it looks like I'm wrong. If you something have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. You would say should. If you should have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. So let's answer that question. If you should have any, you might hear people use would, but that sounds that sounds like it could be correct, but I think should. If you should have any more questions, if you should need to see me, if you should talk to someone, you know, if you should. What else have we got here? Any more? I had anger issues. I have had anger issues. I hope that wasn't recently. What's the difference between I'm from Perth and I hail from Perth? They both mean the same thing, mate. I'm from Perth, or I hail from Perth. It's just another way of saying this is where I originate from. I am from there. I've just used the verb to be. I am from Perth. If you use hail from, if you hail from an area, it just means that you originate in that area. I hail from Melbourne. You hail from Perth. People hail from all over the place in Australia. They hail from different countries, from different towns, from different continents. They hail from all over the world to hail from a place. So it's another way of being colourful in your English, guys. So always feel free to play with those kinds of different words. They tend to be interesting and give you a bit more colour. Hugo wants to know, in what situation will we say I was telling her not to get over there than say I told her not to get over there? Okay, this is another interesting one. So you're talking about, I think it's the past continuous this time. I was telling her not to get over there, versus the simple past, I told her not to get over there. So the difference here is when you say I was telling her, I'll have to get my little board out. This is just placing you in a slightly different position in time when you're talking about telling her. So again, imagine that we have the present. Let's just write this out for you guys. So I was telling her not to get over there. So again, so the basic idea is that you have this point in the past. You have this point in the past, and if you say I was telling her, it's no longer, because you're using the continuous, it's no longer a point in time. If you're saying I was telling her, it would be this idea that you were telling her for a period of time. So that's what the continuous tense does. I was telling her not to get over there. The reason that you would use this, though, you wouldn't just say this on its own, or you would just say I told her not to get over there, which would be just this one point in time. I told her. The reason that you would use the continuous past is if you're setting that situation up that something else interrupted it, right? So this is sort of similar to how we were talking about the past simple continuous and the past simple. I had been walking when someone called me. In this case, if you say I was telling her not to get over there when he called. So that's the idea that this thing was happening when another thing interrupted it. So I was telling her in this spot here not to do something. I was telling her as opposed to I am telling her. It's in the past. When, and then simple past, he called. When he showed up. When we had to leave. I was doing this action ongoing when it was interrupted by another action. So the continuous tells me that it started beforehand and was ongoing, and then another action occurred. So that would be why you would use it. If you're just saying it by itself, yesterday I told her not to get over there, you would just say the simple past. If you're putting the fact that you told her yesterday not to get over there into context with another event that happened or interrupted it, that's when you would say, I was telling her when my phone rang. I was telling her when he showed up. I was telling her when it started to rain. So this thing was happening. I was telling her when something interrupted it, when something else happened, when another point in time was sort of placed on top of this thing that had already started and was going while that happened. So I hope that makes sense. Keep thinking about these tenses, guys. These are good questions, and this is the best way to learn by context, by asking these kinds of questions in class where I can chat to you and give my opinions and try and explain them. So I hope it's helping. What's the difference between I saw him drinking and I saw him drinking and I saw him drink? Again, it's the same idea. It's the same idea. I saw him drinking is this continuous thing. So it was ongoing. He was having one drink, he was having two drinks, he was having three drinks. It was a period of time. I saw him drinking yesterday. I saw him drinking at the pub. I went to the pub and I saw him drinking, suggesting that it was happening for a long period. If I say I went to the pub yesterday and I saw him drink, that could be that he just took one sip. Just one drink. That happened one point in time, so as opposed to this continuous thing this time, now it's just this point in time. Yesterday I went to the pub and I saw him drink, so I literally got there, I saw him take a sip, and that was the only thing I saw. Yesterday I went to the pub and I saw him drinking, means that I was keeping an eye on him, and I saw for a period of time that he was drinking repeatedly, whether it was 2 sips or 1,000,000 sips. The basic idea there is continuous means it was going over a period, whereas if you just say I saw him drink, it was one point in time. Doop. So what else have we got here, guys? This is going to be a long lesson. Does to smash something mean to do something? So if we want to use to smash something would mean to break something into parts, to crush something, to obliterate, to disintegrate. So if you've got a rock and you drop the rock on the ground and it's smashed, it's broken into pieces, into parts, it's disintegrated, it's smashed. To do something, we can use the verb smash, but we're going to use it as a phrasal verb followed by out. And in this case, out is the idea of like this sort of opening up and getting it out. And it's kind of connected literally with the idea of out, meaning to smash something out, as in like to smash it with a bat maybe, like smashing a baseball bat, smashing the ball out of the park, getting it done. So I'm going to get up to the plate in baseball and I'm going to do my shot, I'm going to have my shot, I'm going to smash my shot out of the park. It's become just a slang term to mean to do now, where you say, I'm going to get it done, I'm going to smash it out. And it's something that I use all the time in Australian English. As I'm sure you guys have noticed, I always say that I think you guys should smash something out, as in get it done. Not literally get a bat and smash something out of the park, but to get it done, to complete something, to finish it. And that's sort of the idea too. To smash it out would mean the idea of completion. Finish. So do it, but finish it. I'm at work and I'm working hard because I need to smash out a certain thing today. I'm working on my assignment and I'm smashing it out. So I'm gonna complete it, I'm gonna finish it, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna smash it out. So that's definitely a cool phrasal verb that you guys can use if you want to sound a little more like a native speaker. Next time you want to say do something or get something done, say that you're smashing it out, or you're gonna smash it out, or that you smashed it out. Okay? Give that one a go. Can we call a girl mate? Can we call a girl mate? That is a tough question. You can call anyone mate. That's that kind of thing where you can do whatever you want. Some girls are not going to like it, and I probably wouldn't do it to any girl that I was interested in romantically. So the basic idea being that guys call each other mate all the time, mate, 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 and they're usually, on average, not interested in one another romantically. They're friends. As soon as you start using common parlance, so common language, common spoken words like that with guys on a girl, you can do it, and there are some girls that probably enjoy it and like it, and those tend to be the sort of blokey girls that probably work around a lot of guys. But I think if you were to do that to the average girl in Australia, she would feel like you were making her either, or considering her, a blokey kind of friend. Or she might be offended. So it's not the kind of thing that's going to get you in trouble, especially as an ESL learner. If English isn't your first language and you use mate, people aren't going to instantly be like, how dare you? How dare you? They're going to be like, oh, he's just trying to be friendly and be nice. But for me as a native speaker, I would only do it with girls who were friends and just friends, and who weren't, who were, I guess, not going to be offended, who I knew weren't going to be offended by me doing that. So there were a lot of girls in zoology, when I was studying zoology at university, who were lesbians. And so it was obvious with those girls that nothing was ever going to happen, and they were quite blokey girls. They had short hair, they would wear jeans, and they just tended to speak a lot more like men than girls. And so I would refer to them as mate all the time. Hey Rach, how you going, mate? I would use mate in those sorts of situations. So it's a funny kind of thing, but I guess don't be afraid to do it as someone who's learning English as your second language, because it's not a swear word, it's not offensive. But if you have a crush on the person, if you like the person romantically, if you're interested in the person romantically and they're Australian, probably avoid using mate on girls. What else have we got here? You guys are killing it. You guys are freaking killing it. So many questions. Okay, Pete, I have another situation here. Come on, mate, you can do it. I have seen you do it before. In this line, why didn't he say, come on, mate, you can do it? I have seen you doing it before. I have seen you doing it. Again, that's the exact same situation as this, mate. It's just how you are representing that action in the past. So I have seen you do it before is referring to it over a single sort of instant, one event. I saw him do it. So I saw him do it. When I came, he did it right then and there, and it was done, finished. If I said I came and I saw him doing it, that's the idea of it ongoing, like this, ongoing, that he was digging a hole. So I saw him dig a hole would mean I watched him dig the hole and it was finished. Whereas if I said I saw him digging the hole, that means that he started digging the hole before I arrived. I then saw him digging the hole, carrying the activity out, and I might not have stayed till the end. So if I said I saw him dig the hole, I saw the whole thing, it was completed in front of me, one action in time. If I saw him digging the hole, I saw him doing this action. So using the gerund there, saying doing, tells me instantly in my head that that activity was ongoing, and that is what you saw, as opposed to the one event being what you saw. I saw him dig the hole, as opposed to I saw him digging the hole. It was ongoing and then I left while he was still digging the hole. So I hope that makes sense. But these are good questions. These are good questions, and I hope it's going to help you work out when do I use the continuous, when do I not use the continuous, because it's all kind of linked. These tenses aren't there independently, they're all sort of interrelated, and so once you start understanding one or two of them, you're going to start figuring out, that's what these other ones are for. So keep asking these kinds of questions. They're really, really good. Would you recommend learning two languages at the same time? For example, English and French. This one comes from Andres. I am definitely This is a difficult question. I like learning two languages at once. In fact, I'm learning three at the same time at the moment. Well, not including English, if you don't count that. But I would always suggest that you don't start learning two languages at the same time. So, for instance, and I can get my board out and talk about this, I try not to start learning two languages at once because you need to kind of give a certain part of your brain, a certain part of your attention to one language when it's at different phases, at different stages. So when you first start learning one language, you might get bored with that sort of aspect of beginner level language learning really quick in the day. You might have half an hour, you might have an hour to do that. And so when you finish doing that, if you're learning another language at the same time, you might not really have that energy left, right? So that's the idea of you having sort of one language here at beginner level. If you have another language up here that's more advanced, when you get bored with this one and you shift to this one, you're not doing the same thing, right? So for instance, if I was learning Spanish right now, I'd be learning the basics and I'd get bored with that pretty quickly. I can normally smash out about half an hour to an hour. And then I might switch over to Portuguese or French, which I can tend to read in, or I can watch TV in. And so it's less, it requires less attention. And so when I get like mentally fatigued, I can relax, but still be learning. So that's my main thing. I would suggest that, again, it's up to you and what you think you're capable of doing and your context, how you're living life. If you need to learn two languages at university or something, but if it's just leisure and fun, I think it's always better to do one thing well than two things poorly. So I would suggest pick one, focus on that for a period of time, level it up, and then once it gets to a certain level where you're comfortable with it and you can start, say, listening to podcasts, watching TV or reading in it, then you might miss the sort of initial parts of learning a language, and that would be when you would start learning another language. So that's my advice. So at the moment, personally, I can function pretty well in French, although I'm a little bit rusty as I haven't paid that much attention to it actively, but I can watch TV and movies in it pretty much without subtitles, whereas Portuguese I need subtitles, so Portuguese requires a bit more focus, and then Spanish requires a heap of focus if I'm to get anywhere. So that's why I sort of have them all at different levels, and I can switch from one to the other when I get bored or when I get tired or, you know, when I want to relax versus really pay attention. So give it a go and see how you go, mate. Just a cultural question. In Australia, how do kids call friends or their parents or someone who is older than them? Is it okay to call them aunt or uncle? So unlike a lot of Asian countries, Hugo, and I take it you're from Vietnam based on En being your surname, we don't really use that kind of familial relationship pronoun sort of stuff on close friends, on non-relatives. They tend to be only used for relatives. There might be exceptions where two people that are really good friends might refer to each other as brother and sister. You know, it just depends on their sort of individual relationship, but I feel like that's very rare. It's not the common thing. So if two kids were incredibly good friends, they'd call each other mates, best friends, besties, girlfriends maybe. Two girls would refer to themselves as girlfriends. Two boys would never refer to themselves as boyfriends unless they were romantically involved. Their parents, they would always, if they were referring to each other's parents, they would probably just say Mr. or Mrs. so-and-so, so Mr. and Mrs. Smithson, or they'll just use the person's first name. They'll just say Peter or Ian or Jeff or Jane or Sarah. It's not really offensive at all to use someone's first name. We're very just informal in Australia, so you'll tend to get that gauge. You'll speak to people and you'll get an understanding. They'll say, just call me Pete, it's fine. I think the difference between Asian cultures and some of these other cultures that have these sort of hierarchical aspects of grammar and language in English and I guess Australian English, because that's what I can speak for, it almost makes us feel uncomfortable if you start calling us sir or madam or even Mr. Smisson. If someone called me that, I'd feel very uncomfortable. I'm constantly wanting to make sure people think of me as an equal and not as someone above them. I don't like that feeling. A lot of Australians won't really like that at all. For instance, the people that I work with, a lot of them are professors and doctors, and even then, if someone calls them Professor so-and-so or Doctor so-and-so, they'll be like, don't do that, just call me Peter, just call me Richard, it makes me feel uncomfortable. So that, I think, is one of those different things between our cultures, is that we're very informal, and once you get to know someone, you tend to be able to just use their first name, or even just call them mate, and yeah, it tends to be fine, but you'll get this. You can always start with Mr. or Mrs. so-and-so, or Sir and Madam, and see how you go. I hope that helps, mate. Jeez, we're going through it. What is the meaning of take something into consideration? I guess the basic idea with this one, guys, is that if you imagine this circle is all of the things that you are considering, if you take something into your sort of circle of consideration, you are now considering it. So if we take that into consideration, it means that we are going to consider that thing, or that we are considering that thing. And so that's the kind of language that you'll hear probably formally. So like if you went to a court case, so you went to, and the judge said something like, the person was intoxicated and crashed his car and killed someone, but we're going to take into consideration the fact that his wife had just died. So we're going to consider the fact that this other thing had happened. We're going to consider this as well. You can just say we're going to take this thing into consideration. We're going to take something into consideration. So you would imagine you've got, some area where you consider things in your mind. You're going to take it in to consideration. So that's a good one. That's a good one that you can definitely use a lot. What's the difference between collect and pick up someone? Are they the same? Juliet, yep, they're definitely the same. So you would say collect your kids from school, you're going to pick them up. You would pick your kids up from school, you're collecting your kids from school. However, these verbs can be used in different ways. So you can collect things like cards. If you're a fan of sports cards or Pokemon cards, or even books or stamps, collecting them would mean like to get, receive, and then store loads and loads and loads of this stuff. Like to collect it. I want a lot of it. I'm going to collect all of them. I'm going to collect them all. It's the same sort of idea of collecting your kids. You're going somewhere to get your children. You're picking your children up and then taking them home. Pick up can mean to literally pick something up. I've dropped something. I've now picked it up. And that's the basic idea here. As opposed to sort of collecting, which would mean like gather, to get. To pick your kids up from school, or to pick up your kids from school. That's a separable phrasal verb there. Would mean like you're literally, or figuratively picking them up, like you're going to lift them off the ground and put them in your car. So it's a sort of figurative thing there. Pick up can also mean to hook up with someone. So you might have some kind of romantic night with someone. You might not know them, or you might know them. To pick them up would be to hook up with them. And it's usually used meaning that you were the one who instigated the romantic relationship. So if I went out and picked a girl up, it would be me who went out and actively chatted a girl up, seduced a girl, took a girl home, and we had some sort of romantic situation happen. It could be anything, but that's the idea of picking up. I'm the one who picked someone else up. They were picked up by me. So that's the basic idea of those two. Sometimes I'm confused with instead and rather. In this case, Andres, I think it's sort of interchangeable. If you're talking about like, I want this thing instead of this thing, or I want this thing rather than this thing. Rather implies that it's a preference, I guess. Like I would prefer to do this, I would rather do this. If you say I would rather, or I would rather this thing, that's talking about it's something that you would prefer. I would prefer this thing. If you say I want this thing instead of this thing, I guess the idea of preference is kind of there, but it's not as obvious. It's just, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. I want this in place of this thing, instead of this thing. Whereas rather is, I don't want this thing, I would rather this thing, as opposed to in its place, I guess. But I would just use them interchangeably. Rather could be higher level English, less commonly used. Instead is probably used a lot more commonly by English speakers. I think madam is mean, very bad. Madam depends, Muhammad. It depends on the situation. I would refer to older women like that at the restaurant who I didn't know when I'm trying to be incredibly formal. And the same with men, I would call them sir. I got it, thanks. Alrighty then. Far out, you guys are smashing out these questions. If you call a German guy a Nazi, is it offensive? Yes, that is very offensive. If you call, is it the same if we call an Australian or a New Zealander an Aussie or a New Zealander a Kiwi? No. So you can definitely call an Australian an Aussie. That's 100% fine. You can definitely call a New Zealander a Kiwi. 100% fine. That's because Aussie is just short for Australian and it's a slang term, and Kiwi is the kind of small bird, the animal from New Zealand, and I assume it's a word that they developed for themselves. They're Kiwis. We're Kiwis. It'd be like calling Australians kangaroos. A Nazi is obviously something that's very bad. It's someone who was, involved in one of the worst crimes in humanity. So if you associate just the average German person and call them a Nazi, then you're automatically going to offend them instantly. If you call anyone a Nazi, you're going to offend them. So it's sort of inflammatory, meaning that it's the kind of language that is made to offend someone, because you're not associating them with a bird that lives in Germany. You're associating them with one of the worst people, worst organizations that ever existed. So yeah, don't ever call Germans Nazis. It will not go down well. It will not go down well. All right, man, I got through all the questions. Oh, we got one more. Hi, mate. I've heard Malacca or something like that, especially Aussie Greeks. I'm not sure about the meaning. That's a very rude one. That is a very rude one. That, Rodrigo, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure that means mother effer. So if you F someone's mother, you're a Malacca. But that's a Greek word that most Australians don't know. I just happen to know it because I have some friends who are Greek and they use it quite a lot. But yeah, Greeks in Australia will often tend to speak like that. Anyway, guys, I'm going to finish up there. I've got a few things to mention. Thank you so much for hanging around for an hour and a half. What an insane class, guys. Again, I've opened up the Aussie English Virtual Classroom. That's the group on Facebook. You can join that. Anyone can join that. Get on there. The Aussie English Virtual Classroom. I'm giving you guys missions. So I take little videos and give you guys missions to get involved so that you can record little videos and show your English, practice your English. So get in the Aussie English Virtual Classroom if you haven't already. I've also just opened up the Aussie English Classroom membership on the website. I'll link that here. So if you want to sign up, you get weekly lessons. You can learn with me. You can be in the WhatsApp group as well. I've also got the video library now available where I chop up all the questions I answer in these episodes, in these live classes, and make them listed out in a library in the classroom. You can try it for just $1, guys. That's all it is for the first month. And then after that, it's $5 a week. So give that a go. You get weekly lessons to practice pronunciation, to practice expressions, grammar, slang, phrasal verbs. Give it a go. Be a part of the class and support Aussie English. Obviously, also, I've got the YouTube channel. If you haven't gone over there, check out all the videos. Get on YouTube. We've almost passed 7,500 subscribers. So thanks to all you guys who subscribed over there on the YouTube channel. Comment, guys. Get involved. Use your English. I try and comment and reply to as many of you as possible. And lastly, the Patreon page is going crazy. We have gotten to almost $100 per month in donations from people who've signed up to be patrons. So If you want to support Aussie English, guys, if you want to help me grow, if you want to help me expand, and you want to donate to directly support Aussie English, you can become a patron. Go to the Patreon page. I'll link that in this again. You can sign up for as little as just $1 a month. $1 a month. You can sign up for more. It's totally up to you guys, but it means a lot to me. So anyway, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned a lot. I love your questions. I love your involvement. You're all fucking awesome. I'll drop the F-bomb there, and I'll see you soon, guys. Thank you so much again. Have a good night.